Good morning and welcome everyone. My name is Christine Harliman. I'm the Senior Events and Membership Coordinator at Connecting Up, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar on tips and tools for NFP techies. And with me today we have Richard and Imtiaz who are based in the US, and they'll be presenting today's webinar for you. They've got a lot of great content, a lot of resources for you to take back to see afterwards. So also just to let you know that this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to access the recording and the slides after the webinar is finished. So I will email those to you. Before we go on, I would just have a few housekeeping notes. First of all, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in the question box. We will address them at the end of the presentation, and we will address them one by one until we make sure we go through everybody's questions. But if you do have any issues whatsoever, if audio breaks out or something happens, again, just type it and we will try to sort it out. So other than that, we do have a fair bit to cover, so I will pass you on to Richard and Imtiaz. You guys there?
Yes.
Yes, over to you.
Yes, we are.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Here's the look at the agenda for today's webinar. We'll go over some brief introductions and a couple of surveys, and we'll be diving straight into it.
So good morning for you all. I'm Richard Wallenberger. I'm the IT Director for Parents as Teachers in St. Louis, Missouri in the U.S. I've been here about 7.5 years and in IT since 1987. Most of my work's been with companies between 40 and 120 staff members, and I've been the only IT person in the shop, as well as a manager and a director. I manage 6 direct reports now, as many as 20 at one point. And on a personal note, I've been married 25 years. I have 2 daughters. They're 22 and 17. And I was fortunate enough to win the 2012 N10 scholarship and attend the Connecting Up conference in Sydney last year. So I've enjoyed my time there and look forward to helping you all out today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Imtiaz Hayyoum, and I'm the Assistant VP of Operations for City Square, a local nonprofit in Dallas, Texas. I've been in IT since 2000, and I've been with City Square for 12 years. I've seen my organization grow from 30 or so staff to about 120 right now. So I've gone through a lot of growing pains, and I know what it's like to be a small nonprofit. I started out as a one-man shop, being the technical admin, then became the IT manager, then director of IT, and then in my current position. Personally, my wife and I have 2 kids, 3.5 and a 1.5 old. I'm an avid football fan, and I love to travel. And I hope to make it to the Cricket World Cup in Australia in 2015.
So Christine's going to help us out with a couple of polls so that we can find out a little bit about what's here. So Christine, can you put up the first poll for us?
So the first poll is about your size of organization. So I've just launched that, so you should all be able to see it now and be able to select the right appropriate choice for your own organization. So what is the size of your organization? 1 to 10, 11 to 25, 26 to 50, 51 to 100, or more than 100. So I'm just waiting for as many responses to come through. At the moment, it looks like 11 to 25 is the highest percentage, followed by 1 to 10. So just out of about 18 attendees that we've got today. So I think everyone's voted now, so I will close the poll and I will share the results with you. So you should be able to see. Can you see that, Richard?
I do not. But that's
okay. So I'll just read it out for you as well. So the poll results is 1 to 10 people, 25%, between 1 to 10, 33% for 11 to 25 people, 17% for 26 to 50 people, 8% for 51 to 100, and 17% for more than 100 people.
Okay, that's great. So then we have a second poll, which is we'd like to know how many IT staff members do you have in your size organization. So would you put up the second poll?
Yep, second poll's up. So go ahead and fill that up while we're waiting for the responses. So how many IT staff have you got in the organization? So is it just one, maybe yourself, 2 to 3 people, 4 to 5, or more than 5? So it's really interesting to see, whereas the previous question, there's a little bit more balance in terms of the responses. But this one seems very skewed towards only one person. So I think everyone's pretty much voted. I'll share that now. So 85% of the attendees only have one IT staff. 8% have 2 to 3. 0 had 4 to 5, and only 8% has more than 5. So there's a huge skew there, Richard and Imtiaz.
Great. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about is if you're an accidental techie, and I, in doing some research a couple of years ago, found out there's actually a dictionary definition for an accidental techie, which is on the screen there, and in fact, there's a book written about the accidental techie, and so the definition really is someone who more or less, oh, you know how to turn on a computer, you're in charge of them. And what we'd like to do with our final poll is find out how many of you consider yourself an accidental techie. So if you would post the third poll, this is just a quick yes or no.
So here's the third poll. As Richard said, it's just a yes or no answer. So do you consider yourself an accidental techie? And the majority, a big majority, yes. I guess especially
Okay.
when they have one IT staff, whether it be themselves or somebody else. So, yep, so we've got everybody now. So I'll share that. So 77% consider themselves as an accidental techie, and 23% is no.
Great. Well then, this should be helpful to all of you. So let's move on. Imtiaz?
So what do you do first when you become an accidental techie? Get to know the business. Get a baseline of all the details that you're working with. So working and knowing how your business works is key. Get to know how and what the different programs or departments operate, and because you can think about how you can assist or improve their processes through technology, your opinion is very valid.
So being in IT doesn't just mean you work on hardware or software or help desk issues or what have you. IT can improve the process of an entire organization, and technical people quite frequently think differently from those running programs, and that's really valuable. The goal for IT is to help staff focus on their job and your organization's mission and not worry about technical things. So we should be on the lookout for technology that streamlines our work and makes the staff more efficient in providing their services. And if you're an accidental techie, then maybe you're not as familiar with these things, and that's what we hope to help you with here a little bit today. So
the next thing you want to do is make sure you're integrating IT with business. So you have to sit at the big table. If you're not invited to the table, and by table I mean with management, establish the table. Call it a technology committee or call it a techie happy hour, whatever it is. This is the best because all the persons come to the table and they can benefit from seeing how each other uses technology or isn't using technology. And if this doesn't work, just in the beginning, bringing people together, start out with one-on-one interviews or surveys, and you can get an idea. During this time, you can also pick how IT is strategic in helping drive the mission of the organization. IT and business are partners. They go hand in hand. That's something management needs to understand. And factors that help you in doing this is how much experience you have doing IT stuff, the sizes of the organization, the size of the IT staff, and looks like most of you are just by yourself. So I know it's hard, but it's worth it getting to know people, building relationships with all the department directors or program people, so you can understand their needs in running the organization and meeting the mission.
And if you're just starting out, especially if you're an accidental techie, then talk about the availability of email or a help desk service, or how you can help people, and what are the expectations for your organization. Does email need to be available 24/7, or what about remote access and working remotely, or should help desk requests be responded to within a certain amount of time? Things like that. But talking with the business and understanding, if you don't know what their expectations are, you can't meet them. That's really important. So a lot of this is about managing some kind of risk, and that sounds kind of far-fetched, but the reality is that every decision you make about the things that you is some kind of risk involved in choosing it or in not choosing it, in choosing something different. And again, like it says here, what antivirus system do you use? There are reasons to pick one versus another based on your organization and what kind of computers you use and what have you. How do you, what level of protection you need versus ease of use. If I go back to the organization size, there are literally some restrictions about tools you can choose based on the size of the organization. And again, 33% of you said you have between 11 and 25 people. So there are some solutions that might not work for you from a licensing standpoint, what have you. Cost is always a factor. Using Connecting Up and Donor Tech to get software is a great thing. Accessibility of user data versus flexibility, and one of the ones that I always try to balance is the ease of use for end users versus the ease of administration, and sometimes one or the other makes better sense depending on what's going on at that, which topic you're talking about at that moment. So.
Next is we'll go over a couple of brief slides on budgets. Every penny you spend on IT is not spent on your mission. So make sure you're a good steward with your money when you're implementing IT-related projects. Being thrifty and resourceful by nature always helps. But make sure you're tracking every expense related to hardware and software, your data and voice services, your copier, maybe it's your lease and your maintenance agreements, your training. Yes, tech staff do need some training. That's something that management kind of overlooks, but always put in your budget. Make sure you budget for it every year so management understands that you need your training.
In addition, one of the things that I've found important is that even though IT work is only part of your job, if you're paying attention to expenses, you're going to find opportunities to cut costs in various ways. And it's good to keep track of the places where you're able to save money and show that to the people in charge, because they always appreciate knowing when you got a new contract and it's less expensive, or you figured out a cheaper way to do your printing and photocopying, or what have you. Also, along with budgets, there's some resources, and again, when you get the slideshow, the links that we're showing you on screen are in the notes of the slides so that you'll be able to have them directly. But I wanted to talk about a few that have been very helpful to me. In the U.S., there's a IT management training available from a gentleman named Mike Sisko. He has a number of free tools available. One is for IT budgeting. There's one from Tech Republic. Mike Sisko offers a web-based training for IT management. If you're really thinking that, again, if you're only a one-person IT shop, maybe this isn't something you need, but it really helped me understand financial things, management things, what have you. And Donnie Shimamoto, who's a N10 member from Hawaii, he's a CPA and a IT, I can't remember what his certification is, but he's got some tools, and he really talks about 3 parts of budgeting that are really good to think about. The 3 parts are set up 3 parts of your budget: 1 to run the company, 1 to grow the company, and 1 to transform the company. And in the size organization that you are in, maybe all you're worried about right now is run the company, but if you have those other 2 areas in your spreadsheets and you are constantly keeping them in mind, when you see opportunities to grow or transform, you'll have a place to start working on that. I believe Donnie has some tools available as well. So again, links to that will be in the slideshow.
I also like to add that, going back to talking to departments, build a relationship with your CFO or your controller, because when you start saving the money, they become your good friends. So it always helps to develop relationships even within your organization. So we're going to go over a few best practices, just a few of them. There's many, many out there that you probably Google and find out. The first one is to learn how to prioritize requests. Prioritizing is based on how it impacts your organization. Make sure you're paying attention to the printer is not printing versus if somebody's font size is not right or their font's not coming up. So, but there will always be exceptions. So if the CEO comes in and say, hey, I need to pick something on my Word or my Excel, you don't do it. Backups are key. Backup. It's a great concept, but restoring it is a business necessity. Always have plan A, plan B, plan C, and if you can go all the way to Z, do it. It's very important. Document everything that you do. It's critical, so start small and keep updating it. Add regularly, because if you don't keep adding it, it's a year old and then you're thinking back. So always keep it up to date. You can share those notes with your, most of you are single, but you can maybe share it with your operations person, and by using MS OneNote or putting it in Dropbox.
So I want to give a 3 cheers, if you will, to the Microsoft OneNote, because we started doing that, and it came up as an idea based on we lost access to the internet in our building, and a lot of it happened during a storm on a Friday night, and it occurred to me at that point that some of the details I needed, like who to call at the cable company, were in the office, and I couldn't get to them. And using Microsoft OneNote, I have it on my smartphone. It's available through any web browser. It's stored in a Microsoft SkyDrive in the cloud or a Dropbox type environment. And so now I have access to all that contact information all the time, regardless of internet accessibility or office accessibility. So as far as your documentation and what have you, and how you learn to do these things, you should check with your peers through Connecting Up, through N10, others that might be local to your area. But let's talk about policies and procedures for a moment. And I'm going to give you an example. We are an organization of about 65 employees, and more people are using smartphones or tablets. And here's the real key. It didn't occur to me that I really needed a formal policy until the first time a user came in who already had a smartphone connected to our mail server and now wanted to add a tablet. And I realized at that point that the tools that we had allowed me to enable or disable a user's ability to remotely access our system. But I didn't have a way to manage more than one device for a single user. So we had to come up with some policies and procedures for how to handle it. And when you're looking for these things, there's lots of things available on Google or Bing if you're so inclined. But again, for policies and procedures, they're needed, but don't be a stickler. You balance ease of use again with ease of administration, but you really have to decide which ones are important and stand your ground when you have a good reason. Don't let someone bully you into saying, well, it's really important and we have to have it if there's really a legitimate reason not to do it. You just need to be able to explain that properly. And the reason we say all this is this. When there's a problem, they're not calling Ghostbusters. They're calling your local IT superhero. So let's go on and talk about some tools.
First thing we're going to talk about is antivirus or virus protection. This is a choice you have to make after doing some trials on your own. And pretty much every one of these software will let you download a trial version and test it out. If you're a small enough organization, then you can just buy a few end-user licenses and install directly on the computers. But if you're a large organization, then you'll have to think about enterprise licenses and deploying from the server. So it's just not antivirus anymore. All of these software vendors have bundled options that might include anti-spyware, safe surfing, anti-spam, firewall, content filtering, etc.
One of the points that is important here, and I alluded to this earlier, is that the Microsoft Security Essentials is a great tool, but it's only licensed for up to 10 users in an organization. So if you have fewer than 10, you can use that tool. If you have more than 10, you can't legally use that particular tool. So it's nice because the less than 10, it's free, and after that, you have to pay for it. So the next thing would be disaster planning. If any of you have ever seen the Dilbert video, again, when you get the slideshow, the link to it's in the notes, but there's a video of the disaster plan, which is basically we don't have one, and that's not a good thing. So how do you build a disaster plan? And a good disaster plan is going to take into account a variety of things, but it has to be based on what's important in your organization. So the scope that I'm talking about is like this. Is the disaster that occurred in your server room? Is it in your building? Is it in your city? Or is it in your region? I mean, when we had that bad storm a couple months ago, our internet service provider lost a piece of equipment that affected us and several other customers. So that's one level, but there was nothing wrong in our building. If you were here, everything would have been fine. You just wouldn't have had internet access. So if our building got torn down, what do you do? And you have to know what kinds of things are you going to need to know in a recovery mode, like where do I buy computers, where are we going to house people, can they work remotely, what have you. So these are just some introductory ideas about things that you should consider. So we'll talk a little bit about server and network. So what you want to do here is figure out in your environment what do you need versus what you want. And we're pretty specific about that here because even though we're a nonprofit and our budget's never what we want it to be, if it's stuff we really need, we generally get it. If it's stuff we want, kind of hem and haw about whether it's really valuable and how much we're going to get out of it. We will spend quite a few moments in a little bit talking about the cloud. Again, processes and procedures, change management. Lots of people say that they don't like change. And my response to that is everybody's okay with change, just some people at a slower pace than others. So you need to figure out in your organization, is the majority of your staff handle change quickly or slowly or somewhere in between so that you can figure out what you need to do. Change management is a way to lower your risk and make sure you're documenting what happens. And then there's regulation and law compliance, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Okay, I guess that moment is now. Let me address a couple of things that will be and in the notes of the slide, but because of some of the information I learned while I was in Australia, I understood some specific restrictions about storing data. And again, that was May of 2012. And now in October of 2013, there's quite a bit of change in the rules and regulations that are allowable for a nonprofit in Australia. And in the slide notes, there's a link to connecting up a document on a 2012 global cloud computing study with Australia-specific results. There's also some policies that the Australian government has. Some of those policies, maybe you should follow them. Some of you should follow, and some are specifically related to nonprofits. So there's a link to one of the websites for the government that you can peruse. I spent about 2 hours reading through this material so that I could make sure I was familiar with things that would apply. And the good news is that you are allowed to do much more work in the cloud than even a year and a half ago. So if you're not doing it, it's a good thing. And Imtiaz will talk about that a little bit more.
So I'm just going to go over a few pros and cons of moving to the cloud. Some of the pros are obviously no hardware. You don't have to spend money on buying and installing hardware or software. It's very flexible, scalable, and provides a lot of storage. Ease of implementation. You can sign up and implement it the same day. It's affordable, and its monthly costs are predictable, so it's easy to budget for. And it's always evolving. Upgrades and added features are usually added on as they come out. And it's a great tool for collaboration. As far as cons are concerned, there are some security concerns. Some people might be afraid of losing control. And then, recurring costs, I guess. It's not a one-time cost. It's a monthly fee or a quarterly fee, depending on the service you're getting. And then reliability is another huge thing. And then one of the bigger ones is if it's compatible with existing systems in your network. And we'll talk about a few services out there in the next few slides. So the next one is email.
Imtiaz,
yes.
Before you go on, I just want to say that on the cost side under the cons, I think it's important to understand an example I've been looking at for my company, again, with 65 employees. If we use a paid-for version of Office 365, it's going to cost us about $7,000 US per year, where purchasing the software outright through TechSoup and the Microsoft charity pricing is a one-time purchase of about $3,500. So there's definitely some cost things to be concerned about, even if it's a good idea for all the other reasons.
Absolutely. True. So the first cloud service we'll be talking about is email. The two biggest, well, let me start by saying a few years ago it was still debatable whether working in the cloud would be the norm, and would it work for nonprofits with only an internet connection. Well, it's 2013. We're not only working in the cloud, our offices, but we're working wherever we want to, and we're collaborating using old and new techniques. As far as email goes, the two biggest providers of email service are Microsoft and Google, with Office 365 and Google Apps respectively. Basically, your email is hosted by either one in their data centers, so there's no need for mail services installed in your offices. I used to have Exchange Server for about the first 8 years of my IT life, and but I switched. I had so many problems because you have to invest in so much hardware and personnel as well. So I switched to a hosted platform about 5 years ago, and luckily for me, I have had no problems. I've saved a ton of money, but then again, just in the past year, Office 365 and Gmail have had outages. So it's you really have to consider what you're comfortable with. I think Office 365 is available to nonprofits for free right now, and the Google Apps version, the education version, is free for nonprofits as well. So the next thing, cloud service that's available is sharing, file sharing, and collaboration. With all the collaboration and file sharing apps available now, it makes more sense for certain organizations, depending on their size and their documentation and their material, to go with these cloud offerings because they require very little administration. And all of you out there who are single people managing your IT networks, I know that works great for you guys. And all of them offer access from any computer, any smartphone, phone, or tablet. So you can pretty much work from anywhere that an internet connection is available. Actually, some of these services you can work offline, and then it just syncs back once you connect again. With these services, you're not paying for costly hardware, and their upkeep, maintenance, and patches, etc. You just pay a monthly fee, and your data is available whenever and wherever you need it. Many of these services are two-in-one as well. So by that I mean it's a file sharing option, but it's also a backup. So you don't have to have another tape backup or any other service. I think there are some connecting up resources for cloud computing in Australia that we'll share in the notes when you get the slides. The next thing I want to talk about is backup in the cloud. So back in the day, backups meant tapes and switching them out every day or week, taking a copy home and hoping your server doesn't crash, or having multiple copies everywhere. Well, nowadays there's all kinds of backup software and devices for duplication that can be on site. And then there's a backup in the cloud, which I actually have used for the past 3 years. I personally use Mozy Pro at work, Carbonite at home. We've also tested out CrashPlan. So all these services we've put up here, I have actually tested them out and looked at. So I know these are pretty reliable. As far as this backup is concerned, it's pretty much installing a small piece of software on your server, and then you can choose which files to back up and how often. But make sure you review the files that you back up regularly. I found out that the hard way about a year ago when a staff member added a separate drive, and that wasn't included in the backup, and guess what? The server crashed. Luckily, I had Plan B for my backup, where I had an external hard drive, and it was backing up to that as well. So luckily, lucky for me, we didn't lose a lot of info. Next is the hosted PBX. Some of the companies here in the U.S. are ShoreTel, BroadBox, Thinking Phones, RingCentral, 8x8, and Excel. I think the companies in Australia are FactorTel, MyNetPhone, Neural Networks is one I believe, and then Unite is a newer offering as well. It's a great form or a great alternative for small organizations. Again, no expensive hardware to install and manage and administer and program in your offices. You just buy the handsets configure your voice system through a web interface. You have to have, obviously, a great data connection, and you're pretty much good to go. Making changes to auto attendance and voicemail and moving extensions is pretty simple, and it doesn't require a call out to a technician to come in and do that for you like it would require for a traditional phone system.
So before we go on to the next slide, excuse me, I wanted to add about the backup. The backup isn't just for your data. It's, for example, even though most of you said you're an accidental techie, what happens when you have vacation or you're sick or something else happens or you leave your organization, which obviously it happens? How are you documenting information, having someone who can cover for you when you're gone? The other thing is, what about your services? That internet outage that I keep referring to convinced us to change our phone service so that it was phone and backup data service. So now if our primary internet service goes out, our firewall will automatically switch over to the secondary service, and it's a lot slower connection, but 1.5 is way better than 0. And it's important to think about the things that you need to have in the case of, again, what kind of emergency might you be having. So backup is important, but it's not just data that needs to be backed up.
The next cloud service we'll talk about is help desk. Having a system to keep track of your work really helps a lot. For one thing, it keeps your client, which is your staff, up to date on the status of the ticket, what's going on with the issue. Secondly, it keeps you on track to get the issue resolved, and also tracks your time spent, which in turn actually helps you request additional help from your management in terms of either software or hardware or even personnel. So this is some of the cloud services we have looked at. Spiceworks, Zendesk. We used Zendesk for a while, and it worked out pretty great. Zoho is another, Freshdesk, and I believe Richard just found about Service Desk, which is also a good option. So
I do want to say the Spiceworks one does require that you have a web server in-house because it's not actually a hosted service. So I apologize for that. They are supposedly going to be introducing a web-based service, but it's not out yet. And Jira, if you're not familiar with it, is a product of Atlassian Software, headquartered in Sydney. And they do offer 2 versions of the actual Jira product. One is you have to install locally. That version is available to nonprofits for free. They do offer a hosted service. It is not free, but it does give you access to the tools. And the Service Desk product they just introduced last week, so I don't know if that's yet available on the hosted service, but there are some good alternatives there and maybe others that you all know of.
And you use Spiceworks yourself, right, Richard?
We do. Spiceworks is great if you have a web server internally. Spiceworks is a complete network management and help desk system all in one. It's quite full-featured. It is entirely free. It includes a web-based portal for users. It can talk to your mail server. We use it in quite a few different ways, and highly recommend it if you have a web server in your company.
And all the others listed on there are either free for nonprofits or have a very small monthly fee, and they're all pretty good. The next thing we'll look at is donor management of donor databases or constituent databases. I think this is one of the most important tools that a fundraising department needs to do its work, keeping track of the constituents and their giving records and other pertinent information. There's no one-size-fits-all in this category, so you'll have to spend some time and research and ask a lot of questions before choosing a service. And this is not the only tool that a fundraising or development department needs to raise money. There are services for finding or matching grants, software to manage your contracts and grants, e-communication software. tackling email marketing communications. The most popular one being Constant Contact, MailChimp, and then GetResponse or Vertical Response for your year-end campaigns and newsletters. As an IT person, I think IT needs to keep an eye out for services that will help our people raise money all the time. We should benefit from it too. So we, in my organization, have used Orange Leap before, but we just switched to Blackbaud just because it was Orange Leap wasn't meeting our needs. We just needed to take a step up. So we've moved to Blackbaud recently, and it's working great for us. And we also have used Sage's accounting software as well. Anything you want to add, Richard, about that?
Yes, in our organization we use a system called Aptify, and I know they have a reseller in Australia. They were at the Connecting Up conference at least in 2012. It's a pretty high-end and I will say fairly expensive system, but I did want to note also that Salesforce, the Salesforce Foundation offers nonprofits 10 licenses for free and an 80% discount on any additional licenses that are needed. And they have a nonprofit starter pack that's, those who've used it have said it's really nice and complete. But one of the things to think about in any of these systems is if you're doing any kind of donor management, what requirement does your organization have to tie that into the financial system that your organization uses, and make sure you research that and understand what needs to happen and what can happen between whatever financial system you use and any of these tools that you might look at, or other ones, obviously. Moving on, let's talk about some resources, and most of these you probably know already, but we wanted to reinforce them as really valuable resources. I don't work for a large enough organization to consider myself a CIO, but when I read CIO magazine, I learn about things that organizations pay attention to, and then I try to equate that into what's the relevant thing for us. And I guess I should have added the Connecting Up and Donor Tech on here because they're good resources for you locally. But also wanted to point out, again, a Mike Cisco book that's available for free. And N10 has a great book on managing technology to meet your missions. It's a really good resource. But all of these things, and don't forget, you know, who's around local that helps you out.
And of course, Google. I mean, you search stuff and you'll get something. You get answers in forums and whatnot. So.
And I will add that as we do a lot of researching on whatever particular issues are, the SpiceWorks system has quite a nice community of support. And if you're Googling technical things, many times you'll find in the top 5 or 10 answers, you get something from community.spiceworks.com. And I strongly urge you to consider signing up to join the community, even if you're not using the software. It's free and it's a great resource, and again, it's an environment where IT people like to help other IT people.
Yep.
So if you don't find your answer, ask the question and somebody will answer it for you.
Yeah, it's true.
So then we wanted to talk about a Pocket Toolkit, and I kind of came up with this idea, and Imtiaz and I have really lengthened the list of things that we have. And basically these are things that I have, most of these and a couple of different things on a flash drive, jump drive, thumb drive, whatever you choose to call it, that I carry around in my pocket when I need to do troubleshooting at somebody's desk. And by the way, one of the ones on here called CCleaner is a registry cleaner. It's there is a Mac version if any of you are Mac users, and in the notes again for the slideshow, the actual URL for all of these is in the notes so that You can go search for them if you like, but they will be provided. And a couple of these are really important to me that we use frequently are the CCleaner and the defraggler. By the way, all of these tools are free. There's no cost for any of them. And those are the two that I use the most. There's one that's not on here called Belarc, B-E-L-A-R-C. And Belarc, you can run it on your computer, and it gives you an extremely thorough list. And one thing that it does that I don't think anything else does is it tells you how many memory slots are in a computer and how many of them are in use and how many are empty. So if you're thinking about whether to update the memory in a computer, it's really helpful. And it is a Windows-only tool, but it is free for individual use. Now, my organization, we contacted Belarc, and they gave us a license to use the quote-unquote personal version on all of our computers under a license agreement. So, Imtiaz, did you want to say anything about any of the particular ones?
No, much like Richard, I carry all these in a flash drive, and I have one for each of my employees. We also put it onto a Dropbox, so if you go to a client's desk or office and we need to get something and we forgot a thumb drive, it's accessible. I love CCleaner because it does a lot of cleanup, and you don't have to reboot your Windows machine, which is great. NetScan is another one I use frequently to scan the network to see what IPs are being used and who's using them. And those are the big two that I use all the time.
Okay, moving on. I guess we wanted to talk a little bit about alphabet soup, and what we really wanted to talk about is the things that we've covered here and things that can put you in a good place. And again, these will all be in the notes, but A is assess your situation. You need to know what you've got, and you need to have some way of, like, if something's wrong, how do you know what's wrong if you don't know what's there when it's right? If you're on a network and people say the network is slow, well, how can you know that if you don't know what the network is like when it's not slow? So assess your situation. B is backup. It also includes restore. Best practices, budget. Use the cloud when it makes sense for your organization. H is for help. Ask for help. Ask each other. Ask on the web. Ask in Spiceworks community. Ask wherever you can. Ask Google. Ask Bing. Whatever. But don't be afraid to ask for help. B, again, partner with the business. It's important to do that. Research. The most important thing to me, being an IT person for quite a while now, is be responsive, not reactive. When problems come up, respond to them. Think about what you need to do. Think about the ways to handle it. In some cases, take your time. It's important to get it right, and if it's wrong, it doesn't matter how quickly you did it. And then also tools. Have the right ones and try to anticipate what those might be to help you. Imtiaz, would you like to add anything?
Actually, I wanted to add that whenever you're calling vendors, always ask for non-profit rates. I'm sure you do that already, but if you think somebody is not going to offer it, you won't know until you ask, so it never hurts to ask.
Yeah, so my mom's a certified fundraising executive, and she taught me a long time ago, if you don't ask, they won't say yes.
Absolutely.
So we've got about 10 minutes left for questions. If anybody has any at this point, we'd love to have you enter them in the chat, or maybe Christine can unmute.
We haven't got any question at the moment. So does anyone have any question for Richard or Imtiaz? We do have a bit of time allocated for question.
Or if you guys have any resources you'd like to add that we're not aware of, or tools that you use daily that you find useful.
Yeah.
We're always willing to learn. So,
So does anyone have anything they would like to share? Maybe they know some of the tools that are useful, that are relevant to the presentation. Okay, so we do, in the meantime, while we wait for other people to jump on and give us their thoughts, we have a question here from Philip. So they would like to use the cloud as at this stage, Dropbox for Business, for immediate access across several locations, but want to sync or back up back to our NAS. What is your advice?
I use Dropbox Teams right now and do exactly what you're thinking of doing. So I have a lot of information on there for a couple of departments, and those two departments are in two different locations, and I have two NASs in those locations, so they're backing up locally as well as to the cloud. So just make sure you're comfortable with it. Make sure you understand all the intricacies of Dropbox Teams and the access permissions and stuff. As long as you're comfortable and your staff is comfortable, go for it. So.
I will say the same thing, but we're using Dropbox for Teams in kind of an unusual way because we're using it mostly with external clients, and so we're not syncing any of the files with a local machine. They are all on their web-based service.
So
Peter, thank you for that storage craft shadow product.
yeah, so I was just going to say there was a recommendation from Peter in case people don't see it on the chat box, but Peter was saying there's a good backup system that they used in Australia. It's called Storagecraft Shadow Protect. So thank you for that. A question from Peter as well. How easy is the new version of Spiceworks to install and commission?
Okay, so I'll try to answer that because I have someone who worked for me who actually did it, but the Spiceworks, so I'm not a web person by trade, and his response to me was, you double-click the installer and it does most of the right things on its own, but I can't be more specific than that. I'm sure there's good documentation on their website.
And like Richard was saying, if you get on the community, there's more than enough people willing to help you out. There's no right or wrong question, so don't hesitate to ask for help.
Another question here from Christine Salvini. Do you have any recommendations for small NFP as far as website creation?
I have used Squarespace to set it up a client. Actually, let me preface that. We also have a department that I run as a social enterprise from our organization, which is called City Solutions, and we actually provide IT services to really small nonprofits that can't afford a vendor and stuff like that. So we've used Squarespace, to set up some websites, and that's really worked out. It's pretty simple, so you might want to give that a look.
Thank you. I actually did see Squarespace when I was at NTC, and they look really, really cool. So, and I think they've been advertised a lot on Spotify. So, a question from Gail. Would you recommend Dropbox as a backup place for files?
So I'm a little hesitant about that. It depends on the kind of information that you're storing there and what your concern is about security. So the thing that we're doing with a customer, there's a lot of personally identifiable information, and there is, I guess I'll say, could be some medical information, what have you, disclosed in the files that we're using. And the reason we chose to do it the way we did is we did not want those files stored on anybody's local computer. So it's all web-based so that when we don't have to worry about the data being in too many places. For personal use, I think it's a great tool, and I use it. And in fact, that's how this presentation is actually being run off a file stored in Dropbox. But I wasn't concerned about the security of it, and Imtiaz has a link to it so he can get to it, and we collaborated on building it for you. So I guess it depends, for me at least, it depends on what kind of data you're wanting to store, whether it's appropriate or not.
And it shouldn't be just one plan. Dropbox shouldn't be your plan A. Now, you can be your plan A, but you should always have a plan B as well if you're thinking of using Dropbox as backup. So.
Thank you. Maria was asking, in your organizations, I assume you also store financial records in the cloud. I believe in Australia it is a requirement to have these servers locally in Australia. Are you aware of any of the solutions you mentioned, i.e. CrashPlan, that have their servers in Australia?
Sorry. Go ahead, Richard. Sorry.
I actually, this had a lot to do with the genesis of doing this presentation for Connecting Up, because when I was at the conference last year, Microsoft talked about SkyDrive, and the problem was that the SkyDrive that they were talking about was the consumer version, and the Australian rules at the time talked about the data must physically be stored in Australia, and Microsoft was either unable or unwilling or both to comment publicly as to whether they had a data center in Australia. And without that commitment, it wouldn't be right for an Australian nonprofit to store data in that system, number one. And number two, it's a consumer system, which means if your organization is made up of more than one person, there's no actual way to share data unless you're both playing nice. And that's great while you work together, but if somebody leaves and they're the one with the data, they have no technical way to give you access to it other than to email the files to you. So that makes it a little bit dangerous. Many providers are not willing to state where their data centers are, but you need to enter into that from a contractual standpoint when you're talking with a potential vendor. So I can't tell you which ones do, but it is something you need to research. And again, some of the resources that you'll get in the slideshow from the Australian government talk about some of these services by name, and you need to look into them in detail.
Thank you, Richard and Imtiaz. Oh, I can hear myself. Of the cloud-based backup solutions, are there any you have found that have good or bad tech phone support?
The only one that I have personal experience with is Carbonite, and again, it's on a personal level. And I can tell you that I did this for my daughter because although I live in Missouri in the U.S., she spent a year of college in Spain, and we decided to sign up for a plan and get her laptop backed up in the cloud all the time. And the reality was it worked so well I never needed tech support, so I can't answer the question appropriately.
I've called Mozy Pro for once. As I mentioned during the thing, we had a server crash last year, and the response was great. I had no problems. As far as CrashPlan, when we were testing it out, our tech support was mostly through email and chat, and they were pretty good with that as well.
That was the last question that we have. Does anyone have any last-minute burning questions they'd like to ask? Otherwise, I just quickly mentioned, if you remember earlier, Philip asked about Dropbox, etc. He's just saying that they currently use Dropbox for external clients to have access to files without having to grant them permissions via their website. So, yeah.
That's great.
Great. Looks like there's no other questions. So as I've mentioned in the beginning, and as well as Richard has mentioned as well, that we'll be sending you the slides, so you'll be able to access those links that he mentioned throughout the presentation, and I'll upload this recording as well onto our website, and I will onto YouTube, and you will get a link to the recording so you can catch up later on to get a refresher. Other than that, I would like to once again thank Richard and MTS for taking time in what was evening that time and presenting this for us. I hope it's been very helpful for all of you, and thank you for everyone who's participated and asked questions, and I hope to see you again on our next webinar. Thank you guys, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.